Okay, I'm Cindy Kelly, Atomic Heritage Foundation. It is Sunday, July 7, 2013, and I'm in Scarborough, Maine, with Gwen Groves Robinson. And the first question I'm going to ask her is to tell us her name and to spell it.
To spell my name? All right, it's Gwen Groves Robinson, just as you said. Groves Robinson, Robinson. I was born in 1928. My father was posted at the Fort DuPont. I was born in Wilmington, a big hospital there. And I remember nothing of it, except I have heard stories that it was a long trip for my father to come in to visit my mother. I don't because they had an old rattle kind of car that didn't, not comfortable and all of that. And my brother had to come in too, and they would come in after the evening began. And my brother would be left in the car. He complained about that bitterly. So my arrival was, I think my father was happy for a little girl because he had a boy, and I was named for his mother, who died when he was 14 and left the family in his hands essentially because the older male members of it were on the East Coast, and his mother contracted pneumonia on the West Coast in Vancouver Barracks. And so there he was, 14 years old, with his aunt, his mother, and a younger sister, and trying to cope with no money. And so I think it was a horrible shock for him, as you can imagine. He managed, and I think maybe it was then that he decided that the people that were helping him on the fort, the soldiers and officers who came to offer whatever they could, I think it was then that he was impressed with them and maybe at that point decided he wanted to go to West Point. My guess, I don't know, he never said. Next question.
Tell us, what was your father's name?
Leslie, which he never used, Richard, he used Dick, and Groves. So we could always tell how well somebody knew him because if they didn't know him, they would call him Leslie. And if they did, they'd call him Dick. So there's that. Most of everybody, when I was born, they called him Captain or Lieutenant or Groves, you know. It wasn't a first name society.
Now, his father was an Army chaplain, is that right?
He was. He was, the family originally came from the Utica area of upstate New York, or middle, central New York, I think it's called. And it was a big area for lots of Welsh people. And they were, I suppose, Lutheran or Methodist. And the other side, the Grove side, were Presbyterians. And so that's where the family came from. And my father's father, my grandfather, went to Hamilton College and I think studied whatever classics and English and whatever they offered, did very, very well, and then became a lawyer. And in those days, you were an apprentice. You didn't go to law school. You just went to an office and did what you were told to do. And so he did that, and he thought it was not a righteous thing to do. This was a very religious sort of atmosphere, and in the Utica area, and he didn't like cheating people and winning contracts that he didn't think were quite proper anyway. And so he left that and went to, I guess it was Union Theological Seminary, and he became a full-fledged minister. He studied Greek, Latin, Hebrew, all the Bible, history, and just everything. And he was quite a learned man with a very strong interest in science, and, as it was in those days. He was a collector of things. And so then he was a minister in a number of places, all in New York. And then the total number of children were 4. And his wife, Gwen, had a sister who didn't marry. So it was the custom in those days that you would just take on a sister or a mother or an auntie or whoever it was that was floating around with no social security and all of that kind of thing. So this auntie lived with them, and so it was a big household. And the chaplain was always a well-regarded figure on an army post. So he tended to have a big house. All the officers had. If you've been to any of these army posts, they are gorgeous. They really are lovely, and they have such a history to them. Anyway, he always had a big house, and so he filled it with children and all these people. And then the father just decided he was going to, he would be called forth to go to the Philippines. The first one was Cuba, I think, and he was quite a hero then. The soldiers would be wounded, and he had a horse because he was an officer, and he walked everywhere. He ended up having malaria. I think he got either yellow fever or malaria, and so he was shipped back, I guess, to New York and to recover. He was not a well man. I think the malaria business, if it was malaria, I'm not sure, really affected him his whole life. He would sort of sink, and then he would get better, and then he kept. He for some reason his family was in New York. They seemed to be out on the West Coast, or most of the time it seemed, the family, and he would come east, and he was always sort of roaming around, and it left this poor mother with her sister with these 4 children, handling it by herself and tithing with, I mean, so she raised chickens and sort of kept everything going. And the father meandered around. My brother has quite a lot to say about him because he was an interesting fellow, and he was a very nice person. Everybody seemed to like him and admire him. And he ended up settled in Pasadena, close to the Caltech, and apparently knew a lot of the astronomers and geologists, and so that covers him, I think, pretty well.
Very well.
But he was gone a lot, and my father, I think, being the 3rd boy, sort of grew up a little bit. All the letters from my grandmother that I have seen mentioned Dick as being very. Well, he teased his little sister. He was the wrecker of the family, into everything and doing everything. It was a little hard to control. The eldest brother was quite a scholar. The second one ended up, he too was a scholar, English literature. And the elder one, I think, he died very young. They all had heart trouble, seemed to be in the family. And then there was my father, who wanted to be a military man, and the family didn't want him to be. They didn't think that was, I don't know why, but it was a good choice for him. And so that's the way he started. I guess everybody knows that he was always pushed. I don't think he was pushed, really. I think he pushed himself to start high school when he was too young. I don't imagine the standards. They would be close to Seattle, I guess. And I don't think the standards in the schools were particularly high, but he wanted to learn. He didn't want to waste any time. That was always a big issue with him. And he didn't want my brother or me to waste any time either. That was So we didn't waste any time. I'm always doing something. And next question.
Tell me, what was he like as a father?
He was, you see, I was, what would I have been, 12, 13 or so when the war started. So my real memories of him in the house would precede that date, because then he was so busy, and I too was an adolescent busy type, and those are, I have some very good memories of that. But early on, he was, I suppose he dealt with me a little less severely. That's a tricky word because it suggests a lot of things. But maybe I got away with murder, you might say. A bit like he had as a child, I think. And he was always, I have very, very fond memories of him, and we were very close, he and I. And because my brother went away to school when he was 12. He was sent to Deerfield, as you probably know. And so I was there in the house with him. And he was, the interesting thing about our relationship was that he loved to play games, any kind of game. And we all had nicknames, and we had a variety of nicknames. And then we would play these games. And he would always end up being the baby. So it was really odd because he was a big man. I don't remember him as being ever very thin, although he was in his youth. For me, he was always beginning to billow out, I think, in Leavenworth when I would have been 7. But he used to, in Leavenworth, he used to keep a little box in his desk. The arrangements for the families were that the officer who was studying there would have a big room to himself, and nobody else could enter it. It was his study, and that he was supposed to study. But he had a big desk there, and in the top left drawer, he kept a little box, and he would fill it with dimes. And that was for me, the dimes. I could go and get a dime whenever I wanted to ride horseback, because there was a Negro sergeant whom I just adored. He was lovely. He used to go around on his horse around Leavenworth streets. His horse was named Applesauce, and he named him Applesauce because he liked applesauce, and that was a good name. Then he had 2 little ponies, and he would ride around, and the parents would, give a dime, and the child would have a ride. Well, I rode a lot that way with him, and he was my pal. He came to my birthday party. I really loved him. And he took me out in the open prairies and, sort of at dusk. And I had some wonderful memories with him. But anyway, my father would leave these dimes because he wanted me to do that. And concerning money and my father, I cannot remember him when he didn't have a little piggy bank on his bureau. And then there would get 2 piggy banks, and then 3. I now remember 3. A great big black one was for pennies. A little green one was for dimes, and that was kind of a handsome little animal. And then there was sort of a medium one. I don't know, I can't remember what it looked like. These were ceramic. And he always would give a bigger bill to get change. He loved change. And he would bring the change home and put it in his pigs. And Dick and I were engaged from time to time to take a knife and hold these things over our heads to empty them. They would all shower down on our face. And I don't know, but he would deny himself things in order to get change, to feed his pigs. And it was a nightly performance. And I'm trying to think what else you might like to hear about. Um, just the games. He was fun to be with, and he was really the king of the household, I think, for all the big decisions, where we would go to school, what we would study, what our sports would be. And he was very careful about our sports. They were a big thing in our family. And my mother made the decisions about hairdos and whether I brushed my teeth and all that kind of thing. So it was that an old-fashioned family, I suppose. I don't know how families operate now. I study my children, and I have to wonder a little bit. But ours was it was firmly a pyramid of authority.
So
Like,
tell us about the sports. What sports did he want you to?
well, mostly the horseback ride. He was a very good horseback rider, and so was my brother. I didn't have as much opportunity to do it, and my mother was scared of horses. That was another issue. But that there was that, and the tennis, of course, was the crucial thing. And he had played tennis as a youngster, and he adored tennis. And so we were all encouraged to play, and he put out quite a lot of money to have us have best instruction. That was always crucial. And then I think within the family we lived very frugally. But I think their funds went to us, to improve us, to make, not for frivolous things really, but to develop us, I guess is the right word. And so.
So when did you move? You were 12 or 13 when you moved to Washington, or were you
No,
younger?
no. Well, we moved from Fort DuPont. I went to Seattle because my father was going down to Nicaragua to work on the canal that they were building. And he was working in the jungle, so we couldn't go. So my mother, brother, and I lived with for a year in Seattle, not quite a year, I guess. And with her family, and her family were, he, her father was a military man, so that my mother and father met on a post, an army post, in Helena, Montana, in the middle of a snowstorm. So, anyway, so we lived there for a year. Then we went down to um, San Francisco, and that's where my memories begin. I must have been very young, maybe a year and a half. I just remember this old building that my brother described that we stayed in. Why at the Presidio, which is now a public park, but it used to be, well, it's a beautiful spot. I'm sure you know it, but it used to be Army, and so I think my mother, when they married, that's where the first place they went before they went to Hawaii, which is where my brother was born when they came back. Anyway, for me, I was there briefly, and then we boarded a boat, and we went to Nicaragua. And there, I have a very vivid memory of my father helping me get down the side of the ship. I was terrified because they came out with a tender, and our big, big ship, this thing was bouncing, and my mother's piano was being lowered onto this bouncing thing. I just remember landing in my father's arms and saying, "Oh, thank heavens, I'll be safe now." So that was Nicaragua for a couple of years, and then we came back to Washington, when Washington was just a hot little southern town full of dust. And we lived in cathedral mansions. And my father, at that point, I went to the zoo every single day, twice, morning and night, I think to get me out of the house. My mother wanted to be a singer, and she took her career quite seriously in those initial days. And so she would be doing her arpeggi, and I would be looking at giraffes and hippopotamuses and so on. Anyway, so we lived there for a couple of years. Then we moved to Calvert Street, right opposite the shore. On those big apartment houses have been rebuilt now, but we were very close to the oyster school there. And that was where we got a car. Well, we had the 4 years in Washington. Then we went out to Fort Leavenworth and then Kansas City. I had a lot of memories of him there. He was busy, but he was there. Then we moved back to Washington. And we lived initially in Chevy Chase on Oliver Street. And I remember that my brother and I liked the backyard of this house very much. And it cost $90. I don't know why I remember this, $90 a month. And they didn't want us, my parents didn't want to spend that amount of money. But we lived there for 1 year. I think they just gave in to us. So, and then I think my father was called back to Nicaragua to check out this canal. I think war was looming at that point, and it became a very sort of insistence topic because nobody knew quite what was going to happen, except that it was going to be awful. I think they knew that by then. Anyway, at that point, I was at Lafayette School, not learning anything, and my father decided that he would put me in a private school. He tried to do that a lot for me. He did for my brother as well. And that seemed to be a very important. Education was it. That was the most important. Sports second. Social life, zilch. Nothing. I mean, he simply wasn't interested in it. It was a waste of time, unless it was somebody who was really had something to teach him. Education was a very big thing of it, in the Utica area of New York. Anyway, then he went down. He was gone. I went into the National Cathedral School. My brother at that point was in Deerfield, and then war broke out. I remember being at the Army-Navy Club by the swimming pool and hearing my father talk to some other men who were there, who were obviously either in the Navy or Army, officers, and they were talking about what they would do with their families because they were expecting, war, bombs. Washington, was not from that point of view, a safe place to be. So he decided we would go to Delaware. He knew Delaware because he'd had his Fort DuPont days, and he just figured it would be quiet and he could get to us, if he was in Washington. I know that he very much wanted to go overseas, but I think his first job was, well, you know better, that really more accurately than I do probably, but General Gregory, Edmund B. Gregory, do you know that name? Sure you do. Oh, all right. They were very good friends, and they were both General Gregory and his wife. My mother was a very good friend of hers, and my father was a very good friend of General Gregory's. But they were older. I may be as much as 8 years older. And so I remember going down to these big buildings because my father was taken on by General Gregory to do these big tasks of building camps and setting up the army. Huge amount of work to do in construction. So he did that. When did he do the Pentagon? Was that would be after?
No, yes, it was.
Or before?
It was before the Manhattan Project assignment. It was
yes, that
before,
I know. But was it had war? War was looming, wasn't it?
War was looming. Right.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, there was that, and then he was then he was taken on for the Manhattan Project, and is at that point, you see, he was just gone. He was out of the house almost all the time, and that first Christmas, I remember making him laugh so hard that I thought he was going to pop. And my mother said afterwards, she said that was the best thing that's happened to him for a long time. I was 14, and I think Garfinkel's was hiring anybody they could use for staff behind the counters on the ground floor. And I was assigned with an old friend of mine to stationery. I had a couple of friends in hosiery, and it was really weird. But there we were, and it was Christmas time. This was a Christmas holiday job, and some girl came up. I think she would be about 16. Mind you, I was about 14, and I didn't know anything. She didn't know much more, but she was having her debut, and she wanted some little invitations. And so I said, if you write out the invitations in red ink, that would be really very good looking. So she thought that was wonderful. And then I was, they tried to bring it all back, and I had to go up to the main offices. Anyway, I told my father this story. I'll never forget it. And he just laughed and laughed, and it was a real relax, for him. So, and then I guess you want to know, I played tennis with him in the evenings. That was a very big thing. And I didn't mind doing it if I'd done my homework. But I would go down to his office. I would take a bus, I guess it would be, or a tram. They had those turquoise, weren't they? The trams that would move on the tracks. They were really something. Anyway, I would go down and then have to walk quite a long ways because the tram didn't take me quite where I needed to go. And I would carry my racket and my books, and I would have to sign in. Or sometimes I would just wait for him, and we would go out. And he and Jean O'Leary and I don't know where my mother was. Anyway, she had a hard time during this period. And because, well, it's a long story. We would go to the Allied Inn. Or Allies Inn? I don't know if it's that a name that. It was a big restaurant, but it was a cafeteria, and they had very good food. And it was a big wartime operation. It was down opposite the Treasury Department, and we would have trouble parking. Then we would walk up, and Jean O'Leary smoked. Yes, I think she did. Yes, I'm sure she did. Anyway, she also drank coffee, neither of which my father approved of. So anyway, we would go out for dinner, the three of us. And we'd sit at this table. It'd be crowds, because it was wartime, and there were all kinds of people in Washington. Everybody was in a hurry. And then we would go back to the office. And I remember my father saying to Jean, you don't want coffee. It's not good for you. Put out the cigarette. They had a good teasing arrangement. And one time, after we had been in the office working, it was about 9 o'clock, and that was sort of my bedtime. It was dark, and we saw Jean to her car, and she just unlocked the car and got in. And my father said, "Hey, watch it!" like that. And Jean just froze. And he said, "Somebody's in the back seat." And nobody was in the back seat. It wasn't a tease, but he wanted her to be careful to get in. He did the same sort of thing with me later when I was driving a car. I was learning to drive, and he suddenly got terribly excited. And then I said, "What was that about? Why?" He said, "Watch out, there's a car, And he said, "I just wanted to be sure that you could endure any kind of, catastrophe or worry. So those were the two instances of that. I'm sure he tested my brother several times, but I don't know about that. So more about the war years. Well, we used to, on Sundays when he was around, we would always be out at the country club playing tennis, which he loved. He had very bad knees, and he always wore these guards, I guess, I don't know, elastic on his knees. That seemed to help him. His game was very canny, and whereas I was trained to have beautiful strokes and all that kind of thing, he was always chopping and slicing and winning. He always won. It was very irritating because I looked much better than he did. But and he would stand fairly still and just outwit you. What else? Well, I remember a horrible time for me. I was an adolescent, and my mother was to christen a Liberty ship, and we went down to Sea Island, a big resort in Georgia, I think it was, and and that was going to be his holiday. He was to have 2 days, and I don't know. I think already he was having trouble with his heart because when he died, he had something in his medicine cabinet that said for heart pain. This is old-fashioned. They wouldn't say that now. They would say something else, more specific. But he had had that for a long time, and I think just the doctors just said you need to rest. So anyway, we went to Sea Island. My mother christened this ship, and then we had several days there. And that during that time, he played a lot of tennis. He'd always hire the professional at the courts. There would always be somebody who was good, a professional. And the professional, I don't know whether he told him, don't make me run, but he would stand at the baseline and return these shots, and that gave him a lot of pleasure. And we used to play ping pong together. And I remember the first time I knew I was going to beat him, and I thought, I don't want to win. I don't want to win, so I lost the game. I remember that vividly. And we had the base. That was during the war, I think. He would, you know, any kind of game he would love. Apparently, in his family, the mother and the three brothers were champion bridge players. They beat everybody all around. All the posts and cities they went to, they beat everybody. And they were also champion backgammon players. And I used to beg my father to teach me backgammon, and he never wanted to. I don't know why. My mother didn't like games. They were well matched. Very interesting there. But she had a nervous breakdown during the war, and I think that added terribly to his problems. He was carrying a terrific load, and also my brother was at Princeton and all his chums were signing up for the Marines, and they were wiped out. I don't know how many friends he lost. This was at Princeton. He was waiting to be old enough to sign up, and but then he got into West Point, which was what he wanted and what my father wanted for him. They both wanted this desperately, so he got his appointment. But all during that year, my brother was saying, "I can't wait. Why am I waiting? I want to sign up now." But as soon as I can. That would be July. He was a July 10 baby, so he would finish his sophomore year at Princeton. But that was an issue. I mean, these burdens that my father had were that and his weight. And I think the doctors were all saying, you better watch it because of the worry, the weight, and he would sit at the desk. And then I think his elbows developed a problem. They became numb. Because if you see photos of him, he was always like this. He was on the phone, yeah, and then he'd shift, and his elbows they became numb, and that was a problem. I don't know how he stood it, but he did.
So it sounds like your mother really bore the brunt of the pressure on him.
No, I wouldn't say that because nobody really quite believes this, but she did not know what he was doing. Do you believe that? May I ask you? Say yes or no.
It's very hard to believe.
Yeah, well, it's true. It is absolutely true. And they were, my mother was very artistic, she was a linguist. She knew 5 languages, and she was a singer. And my father was always very nice because she would want to go, if they had tickets for anything, she would want to, or plan to go out, she would want to go to an opera or a concert. And I can remember my father's knees hurting, but he would go and he would take her and sit there, and he was bored. And so it was an interesting relationship. What they had together was their standards, I think, of life. They both were brought up in the army. The government, the country was it. Very, very important. In a way that I think I couldn't expect my children to feel. But we were, when the flag came down, you held still. And you took it down at 5 o'clock. You didn't leave it till 5:30 or 5:45, and if it rained, you had to do special things. They both grew up firmly in that milieu. People, all of them thought that way, particularly, I suppose, on an army post. But I think throughout the country, wherever we went, we felt, we were taught to salute the flag or whatever it was we had to do in school. And I don't know if they do that anymore.
So your dad was obviously held himself to high standards,
Oh,
and everyone else.
Yes. Particularly anything to do with education or self-improvement. Well, however he would have defined that. Some of us would not define it the way he did, but he was always for, when he had very little money, this was, you see, he was a second lieutenant with 2 children, and no, during the the Depression years, they were not advancing the Army staff. They were holding them back. And I don't think my father ever thought about leaving the Army. I know he was enticed once in Kansas City because we became friends with a banking family by the name of Helmer. Anyway, this man was very wealthy, but he spotted my father and said, "Come and I'll give you, you can have this bank and that bank, but take over." And he said, "No, I think my mother might have, she would have backed him on that, because the country was more, and they were very patriotic. Oh, this was a bond. They knew all the same people. My mother was a charming hostess. She was a very shy person, but when pressed, she would do it. They never drank. Drinking was out because it was decreed by the government. So he didn't drink, and he didn't. I remember when he first did drink, we gave a cocktail party in our little tiny house, and it was crowded with people, and he had a drink. That was after the war. He didn't. That was not a temptation for him. His family didn't do it, and nor did they smoke, nor did they drink coffee, nor tea. They just improved themselves. Full-time job, depending on how rotten you are to begin with. What next?
Um, if you could tell, you talked about games. There was one very charming story you talked about 2007 program about how
When?
you had been afraid to go up the
Oh
stairs in
yeah.
the dark.
Yes. Well, again, you see, there he was. I told you he used to pretend that he was the youngest in the family. And then, so I was frightened of this staircase, and every night it was a thing getting me to bed, and it was fear. It wasn't that I just didn't want to go to bed. I So I would have to climb this staircase, and I remember the whole family at the bottom of the staircase watching me go up, watching me try to switch on the light. And finally, I just really couldn't do it anymore, and so I called him Dino most of the time. We had a lot of nicknames for each other, but he would pretend he was the baby, and I would be the mama. And he used to stand there and shake his legs, trembling. He used to do that a lot when he was playing baby. So I had to take him upstairs, and I got up there that way, which was very, very nice. The games were the main household feature for both my brother and me. Yeah.
So, do you remember when your mother and you learned that he had been in charge of this project to develop a bomb? Do you remember?
When it went off was the day. I was down to improve myself in the summer so that I not waste a minute. I was sent to a secretarial school, the Washington School for Secretaries, I guess. I don't know where it is. I'm sort of down near F Street somewhere. I can't remember. And we all had, it was a hot, hot summer, and we all had to wear gloves, carry a purse, wear stockings, and a hat. Unbelievable. And I had to climb onto this crowded tram to get down there. And I would sit all day while they would play music and faster rhythms, and I would go, anyway, that was the way I spent the summer. And then one day, Jean called, left a message at the office, and said she had to speak to me immediately. So I did. I got on the phone, and she said, I want you to take a taxi to go home immediately, and don't speak to anyone. Well, I was happy to leave, she said, do you have enough money to take a taxi? Because I go around with 3 nickels or something. Well, I did. I think it was something like $1.25. No, I remember that. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I don't remember that. But anyway, it seemed like that. So I got a taxi. I left the school and got a taxi and went home. And I think I wrote about this in Grueff's book. I don't know whether he included it or not, but he was interested in this horrible, confused day that we spent. I went home, and my mother was there, and she said, I'm not supposed to talk to anybody. And so I said, well, I think we can talk to each other, and then there was an officer who came, and in the meantime, I had put my bicycle up for sale, and so there were a crowd of people trying to buy my bicycle, and they had to be taken down into the basement where it lived, and it was just a madhouse. Everything was cuckoo and crazy, and then I don't know which officer it was. Somebody very nice. Just sat with us all day, and it was on the radio. I think that was sort of where we heard about it. There was a big bomb, and there was my father had done all this work, and that's how we found out. And you don't believe that, but that is the truth. And my mother was absolutely astonished. My brother, I think, I remember sitting in the car. We were always in the back seat, and my mother and father in the front. And Dick said, I know what you're doing. Because it was a sort of big secret. Dino always would say, no. We called him Dino. And he said, no, nobody knows. And so Dick was prying around. He would have been, um, when he did that, about 18, I guess, just pushing, father son. And so he said, you're doing something with a big bomb. And Dino put his head back and he said, ha, ha, ha. Dino is what we called him, and I think my brother had a different story, but my mother told me that she used to call him Babbo Dino, Italian. And that's how it got to be Dino. We all called him Dino. The grandchildren called him Dino. And he was lovely with the grandchildren. He was very family oriented. He paid for their educations. Utica. Great place.
How did things change for him after, or for you, once this news was out? And did you have people wanting to interview you, or what kind of attention did the family get?
Oh. Well, on the day that the night before, I think this is maybe more interesting. The night before, the Hiroshima bomb, we went to the Army Navy Club in town. Is that still operating? Yeah. And to have dinner. And we were with somebody named Mr. Thompson. Is that a name you know? He was a big Greenwich banker, I guess, a very wealthy man, but he had something to do with maybe the construction or something to do with the business of setting all this up. And we had dinner together, and then he and my father peeled off and said they were going to go back to the office to sleep. And he said to my mother, I may not be home tonight, as this is. And that was it. So they did. And I think they had set up 2 bunks in the room, and they were just sitting there hoping it all would work. And we just went home. And the next day, we went again to eat. And it had all happened. We knew what was, and I think actually he was wanting to see his friends. Well, what do you think? I mean, I haven't seen you. I mean, he didn't have a lot of friends, but the ones that he did have, I think, respected him. If they didn't, I think they would have liked him. I know the Gregorys really liked him, and I think he had a number of very firm friends who admired him more, perhaps, than they actually knew him. That's a guess. I don't know. Anyway, we on that occasion, lots of people came up to congratulate him, and these would be fellow officers, classmates, and people that he had passed by, in his sudden promotions. He just sort of exploded to the top, skipping lieutenant colonel entirely, which was unheard of, and there was resentment. And some of these, I don't have names, I don't remember. But I remember when we left, he said to my mother, he said, I wonder why you noticed that so-and-so didn't say anything, And it was a custom, I think, to congratulate any kind of victory in this huge effort of winning the war, you see, patriotism. So there was that. And what else?
Then, I don't know, we don't have to get into this, but after the war, there's a big struggle in Congress as to whether the military or the civilian should be controlling all of this. And I think at first he had sided on the side of military control, obviously, as being in the army, and
Yeah.
the civilian prevailed. And I think, well, anyway, tell us how you see the post-war playing out from his perspective.
Oh dear, that's a toughie for me. I don't know enough to really answer you with any degree of interest. You may, um, I think he would have felt certainly that the military were better because he was very suspicious of, and rightly so, of other countries seeking the information or whatever it is. You could say the recipe for the bomb. So that's really all I can say. I don't know. I used to go to the hearings regularly, and I knew there were certain people that he didn't like, and my brother didn't stand, and they were all liars and selfish, and it's. So there was feeling, definitely, and and then after the war, he worked with Remington Rand, and that was going. And I think he knew the computers were coming in to be a big thing, and I think he saw himself with another career in computer design. And in fact, Remington Rand did the UNIVAC, as you know, and I think that's what he wanted very much. But James Rand, who was backing him 100%, died after, I think, 2 years. And after that, I think my father was totally disillusioned and nothing was moving. I don't know how it all happened. I was really out of the family shortly after that. And then, of course, I committed a terrible sin by marrying an Englishman. So that was interesting and played out very well in the end. But so that's it.
Oh, go ahead.
I will tell you one other thing. He paid for the education, private education, of all the grandchildren when he began to make money. And, they all revered him, were scared of him, and played with him. I have a wonderful picture, which I might show you, but might not. I don't know quite where it is, actually, of him. We bought a boat for our children. We had three. And it was a sort of a rocking thing with a seat on the two sides, but they called it a boat. And my father was really quite large, and also his knees hurt. But anyway, he got in this boat with my children, and we had trouble getting him out. And then when he would, at one time, I think my mother sent us a little gingerbread house for Christmas or something, and it was put up on the counter in our dining room, and he snuck it away, looking at the children. They all screamed after him as he ran into the kitchen. That was the sort of thing that he was most noted for in our family. That and that very steady. When my mother broke down, I was sort of trying to get into college. I wanted to go, and I said to Dino, I don't. My mother, our mother, mom, or whatever I called her, doesn't think we'll have enough money to send me. And this was, I would be a junior in high school, I think, and I was very keen to move on with my education. And he said, "Don't pay any attention. I have put away stocks, and I will sell them for you." Well, he hadn't at all, I'm sure, and not at that stage. So, I mean, we were brought at that. It was when he worked at Remington Rand that he got well-to-do. And until that time, he was just the steady thing. I mean, we didn't have a bank account. I'm sure we did, but because he was very careful with money, and so was my mother. So after the war, um, when my father died, this would be that. Um, we received a flood of letters from soldiers and Marines and naval officers, everybody who had been out of the Pacific, thanking, just recounting what their situation was when the bomb went off and what a relief, and how the families were rejoicing because this had been resolved and they were going to live, essentially. It was the top of it. And what it just filled a huge laundry basket, I remember it. And my mother was a very, she wanted to clear things out when my father died, and she moved into the Distaff Hall, which is an Army officer establishment for, old people, let's face it. And so I think she must have somehow, I begged her to keep them, and she said she would, but then they disappeared. I don't know where they are. Maybe she didn't throw them out. Maybe somebody else did. I have no idea. But there were slews of them, and they were very complete and full, and how grateful these people were. And it was a big moment when we were, they just came in after his death. So he never saw them, but